The envelope trembled in Miranda Zimmerman's gloved hands as she stood in the parlor of her family's sprawling ranch house, reading words that threatened to destroy everything she thought she knew about the man she intended to marry in 3 weeks' time. The letter had arrived anonymously that morning, sealed with plain red wax, and its contents painted Edward Fairmont as nothing more than a fortune hunter, with debts stretching from Santa Fe to St. Louis, and not a single acre of land or dollar to his name. She had met Edward 6 months earlier at a territorial governor's ball in Albuquerque, New Mexico, during the spring of 1885, when the desert bloomed with wildflowers and her heart had been foolish enough to believe in love at first sight. He had swept into her life with polished boots, Eastern manners, and promises of a life filled with culture and refinement. Her father, cattle baron Marcus Zimmerman, had been suspicious from the start, but Miranda had been 22 and determined to make her own choices. Now, standing in the afternoon light, filtering through lace curtains, she wondered if her father's instincts had been right all along. "Miss Zimmerman?" The housekeeper's voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "There's a man here to see you. Says it's urgent." "I'm not receiving visitors today, Mrs. Patterson. He said you'd want to hear what he has to say about Mr. Fairmont." Miranda's heart lurched. She folded the letter quickly and tucked it into her sleeve. "Send him in." The man who entered her parlor was nothing like the polished gentleman she was engaged to marry. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with sun-darkened skin that spoke of years working under the New Mexico sky. His dark hair needed cutting, his jaw needed shaving, and his clothes, though clean, were those of a working cowboy. Worn denim, scuffed boots, a leather vest over a chambray shirt. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp and green as bottle glass, assessing her with an intensity that made her spine straighten. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat to reveal that overgrown hair. His voice was rough, lacking Edward's cultured tones, but there was something genuine in it that made her want to listen. "My name is Quinn Callahan. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have information about your fiancé that I believe you need to hear." "Did you send this letter?" She pulled the envelope from her sleeve. "No, madam, but I know who did. Your father hired a Pinkerton agent to investigate Edward Fairmont 3 months ago. That agent was my brother." Miranda sank into the nearest chair without thinking about propriety. "My father did what?" Quinn Callahan moved closer, but stopped at a respectful distance. "Miss Zimmerman, I know this is difficult to hear, but Edward Fairmont isn't who he claims to be. He's got nothing to his name except debts and a talent for finding wealthy women. You're the third heiress he's courted in 2 years. The other 2 discovered the truth before the wedding." "That's impossible. He has a plantation in Virginia. He's shown me photographs." "Those photographs are of his cousin's property. Edward Fairmont lost everything he inherited to gambling debts 5 years ago. Since then, he's been living off credit and the generosity of people who believe his lies." Quinn pulled a folded document from his vest pocket. "This is a report compiled by the Pinkerton Agency. It lists every debt, every lie, every woman he's deceived." Miranda took the papers with shaking hands. The evidence was meticulously detailed. Gambling debts in New Orleans, unpaid loans in Denver, breach of promise suits in Charleston. The man described in these pages was a stranger, not the cultured gentleman who had courted her with poetry and promises. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why not my father?" Quinn's expression softened slightly. "Because your father died 4 days ago, Miss Zimmerman. He was thrown from his horse while checking the northern pastures. I'm sorry, I thought you knew." The room tilted. Miranda gripped the arms of her chair, her vision narrowing to a single point. No, he was in Albuquerque on business. He's not due back until Friday. The telegram was sent to your foreman, Jack Morrison. He was supposed to tell you immediately. Jack left yesterday for a cattle drive. He won't be back for 2 weeks. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. Edward told me Jack had left early. Edward said he'd handle all the ranch business while Jack was gone. Quinn's jaw tightened. "Miss Zimmerman, I need you to think carefully. Has Edward asked you to sign anything in the past few days? Any documents regarding the ranch or your father's estate?" Her blood turned to ice. "Yesterday, he brought papers he said were from the bank, something about securing a loan for improvements. He said it was just a formality, that we needed to act quickly to get favorable terms." "Did you sign them?" No, I told him I wanted to wait until Jack returned to review them. She stood abruptly, anger beginning to burn through the shock. Where is my father now? The undertaker in Albuquerque. I came straight here as soon as I heard about the papers. Miss Zimmerman, if those documents are what I think they are, Edward's trying to get control of your inheritance before you realize what's happening. Once you sign, the ranch becomes his, and there's nothing you can do about it. Miranda's mind raced. The ranch her father had built from nothing. 15,000 acres of the finest grazing land in New Mexico. 3,000 head of cattle, water rights that were worth more than gold in this territory. Her inheritance represented a fortune, and she had almost handed it all to a man who had spent the past 6 months lying to her face. Where is Edward now? She asked. I saw him riding toward town about an hour ago. Looked like he was in a hurry. Miranda made a decision. She crossed to the desk and pulled out a leather pouch heavy with coins. Mr. Callahan, I need to get to Albuquerque immediately. My father's lawyer needs to know about this before Edward can forge my signature or find some other way to steal what isn't his. It's a 3-hour ride, and it'll be dark in 4 hours. Then we'd better leave now. Quinn studied her for a long moment, those green eyes searching her face. You believe me, just like that. My father was many things, Mr. Callahan, but he wasn't careless with horses. If he's dead, it wasn't an accident, and the timing is too convenient. Besides, she met his gaze directly, I've had doubts about Edward for weeks. I just didn't want to admit I'd been fooled. Something that might have been respect flickered across Quinn's features. You'll need to change. That dress won't work for hard riding. She glanced down at her afternoon gown, all silk and lace and impractical beauty. Wait here, I'll be 5 minutes. True to her word, Miranda returned in riding clothes, her honey-colored hair braided and pinned up under a wide-brimmed hat. She'd strapped on a gun belt that had belonged to her father, the weight of the Colt revolver familiar against her hip. Quinn's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't comment. They rode out from the ranch at a gallop, Miranda on her favorite mare, and Quinn on a rangy bay gelding that looked like it could run all day. The New Mexico landscape stretched around them in shades of tan and gold, sagebrush and scattered juniper, breaking up the sweep of high desert. The Sandia Mountains rose purple in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the warmth of late September. For the first hour they rode in silence, pushing the horses hard, but not recklessly. Miranda's mind churned through everything she thought she knew about Edward, examining each memory for signs she should have seen. The way he'd always had excuses for why she couldn't visit his supposed business interests, how he'd steered conversations away from specifics about his past, the uncomfortable moment at a restaurant when he'd claimed to have forgotten his wallet, small things that hadn't seemed important at the time, but now formed a damning pattern. Why did your brother take this case? She asked finally, needing to break the spiral of her thoughts. Quinn glanced at her, adjusting his seat as his horse navigated a rocky stretch. He didn't. Not officially. After the Pinkerton agency finished their investigation, your father asked them not to send the report directly to you. He wanted to tell you himself, in his own way. My brother Samuel was bringing the documents to your father when he heard about the accident. And where is Samuel now? Headed back to Denver. He's got a pregnant wife and a job that keeps him away from home too much as it is. I was visiting when all this happened, so I offered to make sure you got the information. You just happened to be visiting? A ghost of a smile touched Quinn's mouth. I'd been working a ranch up near Raton, but the owner sold out to a big Eastern syndicate. They brought in their own people. So I came south looking for work. Thought I'd stay with Samuel and his wife while I figured out my next move. And instead, you rode 2 days to warn a stranger about her lying fiancé. Seemed like the right thing to do. Miranda studied him as they rode, trying to understand this man who had upended her life. You could have just sent a telegram. Would you have believed it? She thought about that. A telegram making wild accusations would have been easy to dismiss, easy for Edward to explain away. But Quinn Callahan, with his direct gaze and documented evidence, was harder to ignore. Probably not, she admitted. They stopped once to water the horses at a creek that cut through an arroyo, the cottonwoods along its banks providing brief shade. Miranda splashed water on her face, washing away the dust of the trail. When she straightened, Quinn was watching her with an unreadable expression. What? She asked. Most women in your position would be falling apart right now. You just found out your father's dead and your fiancé's a fraud. Would falling apart help anything? No, madam. Then I'll save it for later. But her voice cracked slightly on the last word, betraying her. Quinn stepped closer, his expression gentling. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About your father, Samuel said he seemed like a good man. The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Miranda blinked hard against the sting of tears. He was the best man I knew. He built everything from nothing, survived drought and rustlers and the territorial wars. He couldn't have just fallen from a horse. You think someone killed him? It wasn't a question, but Miranda answered anyway. I think Edward needed him out of the way. My father would never have allowed those papers to be signed, and as long as he was alive, I would have listened to his counsel. But with him dead and the foreman conveniently gone, I'm vulnerable. Quinn's jaw tightened. We'll get to the bottom of this, I promise you that. They reached the outskirts of Albuquerque as the sun painted the sky in shades of copper and gold. The town had grown considerably in recent years, transforming from a dusty territorial village into a bustling railroad hub. The arrival of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad in 1880 had brought prosperity and problems in equal measure, and the streets were crowded with a mix of Mexican vaqueros, Anglo merchants, railroad workers, and gamblers. Miranda led Quinn directly to her father's lawyer, a shrewd older man named Theodore Jameson, who maintained an office above the First National Bank. They found him preparing to leave for the day, but he ushered them in immediately when he saw Miranda's face. Miss Zimmerman, I was planning to ride out to your ranch first thing tomorrow. I'm so terribly sorry about your father. Mr. Jameson, I need to know exactly what happens to my father's estate. What are the legal requirements? The lawyer's eyebrows rose at her directness, but he pulled out a file. Your father's will is quite clear. Everything passes to you, with a trust established for the management of the ranch until your 25th birthday or marriage, whichever comes first. Upon marriage, control passes to your husband, as is customary. And if I were to sign documents before the will is probated? Jameson frowned. What kind of documents? Miranda described the papers Edward had presented to her. The lawyer's expression grew darker with each detail. Miss Zimmerman, those sound like transfer papers, not loan documents. If you had signed them, your fiancé could have claimed ownership of the ranch through them, especially if he could produce witnesses who swore you signed of your own free will. The marriage would have simply formalized what he'd already stolen. Can he forge my signature? He could try, but I have samples of your handwriting in my files. Any forgery would be challenged. Jameson leaned forward. Miss Zimmerman, are you saying you believe your fiancé may have had something to do with your father's death? I'm saying the timing is very suspicious, and I want the sheriff to investigate before my father is buried. The sheriff is Edward's cousin. The words fell like stones into still water. Miranda felt Quinn tense beside her. I beg your pardon? Second cousin, I believe. They came to the territory around the same time. I thought you knew. Miranda's hands clenched in her lap. No, Edward never mentioned it. Jameson stood and moved to the window, gazing down at the street below. Miss Zimmerman, I'm going to be very frank with you. There are men in this territory who see wealthy women as opportunities rather than people. Your father understood this, which is why he was so protective. If you have evidence that Mr. Fairmont has been dishonest, I urge you to end the engagement immediately and let me handle the legal ramifications. What about investigating my father's death? The territorial marshal is a man of integrity. I'll send a telegram to his office in Santa Fe tonight. But I must warn you, proving murder will be difficult if the death appeared accidental. Quinn spoke up for the first time. Where's the body now? The undertaker's. Your father's being prepared for burial, Miss Zimmerman. I'm sorry to be so blunt. Miranda stood. I want to see him. Miranda, Jameson used her first name gently. Are you sure? It's been 4 days in this heat. I need to see him. The undertaker's establishment was a low adobe building at the edge of town, cool and dim inside. The proprietor, a somber man named Walsh, tried to discourage Miranda from viewing the body, but she insisted. Quinn waited in the front room while she went into the back with the undertaker. Her father lay on a table, covered with a sheet. Walsh had done his work well, but nothing could hide the massive trauma to the left side of Marcus Zimmerman's skull. Miranda had seen death before. Living on a working ranch meant understanding the brutal realities of life, but seeing her vital, strong father reduced to this stillness made her legs weak. May I have a moment alone? She asked. Walsh hesitated, then nodded and withdrew. Miranda approached the table slowly. She studied the injury carefully, trying to see past her grief to the facts. The wound was on the left side of her father's head, a crushing blow that had shattered the skull. But her father had been right-handed. If he'd fallen from a horse, he would have tried to catch himself with his right hand, and the injury would likely be on the right side. Unless the horse had rolled on him, but her father's horse had been trained for 20 years and was as steady as they came. She looked at his hands. The right showed defensive scrapes, as if he'd tried to ward off a blow. The left was unmarked. This was no accident. Miranda returned to the front room, her face composed but pale. Quinn took one look at her and stood. "What did you see?" "Murder," she said quietly. "The injuries don't match a fall. Mr. Walsh, I need you to delay the burial until the territorial marshal can examine the body." The undertaker's eyes widened. "Miss Zimmerman, you can't be serious. In this heat, we need to proceed with burial tomorrow at the latest." "Then pack him in ice. I'll pay whatever it costs. But my father is not going into the ground until justice is done." They emerged from the undertakers into the blue twilight. Albuquerque's streets were beginning to fill with the evening crowd. Workers finished for the day, heading to saloons and restaurants. Miranda felt disconnected from the normal flow of life around her, as if she existed in a separate reality where fathers were murdered and fiancés were thieves. "You need to eat," Quinn said, "and we need a place to stay. The hotel or your father's house?" "The house. I don't want to risk running into Edward at the hotel." Her father maintained a small house on the north edge of town for times when business kept him overnight. It was a simple 2-bedroom structure, sparsely furnished, but comfortable. Miranda let them in with a key she kept on her watch chain. The house smelled of dust and her father's tobacco, and the familiarity of it made her throat tighten. Quinn lit the lamps while Miranda moved through the rooms, touching her father's things, his reading glasses on the table, his spare hat on a peg, a book of poetry, surprisingly, left open on the arm of his favorite chair. She picked it up and saw he'd been reading Tennyson. "He loved poetry," she said to Quinn, who had come to stand in the doorway. "Not many people knew that. He thought it made him seem soft, so he kept it private. But sometimes in the evenings he'd read to me, Shakespeare, Byron, Whitman. He said a person needed beauty as much as bread." Quinn's expression was gentle. "He sounds like he was more than just a successful rancher. He was everything." The tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. "He was my whole world after my mother died. He taught me to ride, to shoot, to manage the books. He trusted me to help run the ranch, and I repaid him by getting engaged to a man who probably killed him. That's not your fault, isn't it? If I hadn't been so desperate to prove I could make my own choices, if I'd listened to his concerns about Edward, maybe he'd still be alive. Maybe he wouldn't have felt the need to hire investigators. Maybe—" "Stop." Quinn crossed the room and took her gently by the shoulders. "You can't think like that. Edward Fairmont made his own choices. If he's responsible for your father's death, that's on him, not you. You hear me?" She looked up at him through tears and saw nothing but honest conviction in those green eyes. For 6 months, she'd been looking into Edward's eyes and seeing what she wanted to see, but Quinn Callahan's eyes hid nothing. Whatever else he was genuine. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You don't know me. This isn't your fight." He was quiet for a moment, his hands still on her shoulders, warm and solid. "My mother was taken in by a man like Edward once. I was 12. She was a widow with a small ranch in Texas, and this fellow convinced her he'd help her run it. Within 6 months, he'd sold off her cattle, mortgaged her land, and disappeared with every penny. We lost everything, had to start over with nothing. I'm sorry. She never recovered, lost the will to fight, died 2 years later, and I've always believed it was heartbreak as much as the fever that took her." His hands tightened slightly. "So, when I see a man like Edward Fairmont trying the same trick, it matters to me. Maybe I can't help my mother anymore, but I can help you." Something shifted in Miranda's chest, a recognition she wasn't ready to examine too closely. She stepped back, and Quinn's hands fell away. "We should figure out our next move. If the sheriff is Edward's cousin, we can't count on local law enforcement." They settled in the kitchen, and Miranda made coffee while Quinn laid out the Pinkerton report on the table. They spent the next hour going through every detail, building a picture of Edward's activities over the past 2 years. The pattern was clear. He would court a wealthy woman, gain her trust, then attempt to access her money through either marriage or fraudulent documents. When his previous targets had discovered his debts and confronted him, he disappeared before facing consequences. But this time, he couldn't just disappear, Miranda said, tracing a finger down the list of debts. He had already set the wedding date, already positioned himself in society here. Running would make him look guilty. So he needed to accelerate his timeline, Quinn said, get access to your inheritance before anyone could stop him. Which meant my father had to die. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Quinn's hand went to his gun as he moved to the window and peered out. It's a woman, looks Mexican, maybe 40. You know her? Miranda looked and felt a jolt of recognition. That's Rosa Martinez. She was my mother's housekeeper and helped raise me. What's she doing in town? She opened the door, and Rosa practically fell into her arms. Miranda, thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. Rosa, what's wrong? The older woman's face was creased with worry. It's Mr. Fairmont. He came to the ranch this afternoon looking for you. When Mrs. Patterson said you'd left with a stranger, he became very angry. He's been drinking at the saloon, telling everyone that you've run off with a cowboy, that you're ruined. He says when he finds you, he'll make sure you marry him tonight, willing or not. Miranda's stomach clenched. How did you know to look for me here? I remembered your father kept this house. I hoped you'd have the sense to stay away from the hotel. Rosa finally seemed to notice Quinn. Who's this? A friend. Rosa, I need you to tell me the truth. Did you see what happened to my father? Rosa's face crumpled. I've been so scared. Yes, I saw. But Miss Miranda, if I tell anyone, he'll kill me too. Quinn closed the door and guided Rosa to a chair. Madam, we'll protect you. But if you have information about Marcus Zimmerman's death, we need to hear it. Rosa twisted her hands in her apron. I'd gone up to the northern pasture to bring your father his lunch. He liked to eat outside when he was checking fence lines. I was maybe 100 yards away when I saw Mr. Fairmont ride up. They argued. I couldn't hear what about, but Mr. Fairmont was very angry. Your father turned to walk back to his horse, and Mr. Fairmont picked up a rock, a big one. He hit your father from behind. Miranda felt the room spin. You're sure it was Edward? I saw his face clearly. After he hit your father, he led his horse away and whipped it, sent it running. Then he dragged your father's body and positioned it like he'd fallen. He was arranging everything to look like an accident when he saw me. Rosa's voice dropped to a whisper. He came over and told me if I said anything, he'd tell the sheriff I'd been stealing from your father, that I'd killed him when he caught me. He said no one would believe a Mexican housekeeper over a white gentleman. He said he'd make sure I hanged. Why didn't you run? Quinn asked gently. Where would I go? I have no family, no money. And I thought, maybe I was wrong. Maybe I didn't see what I thought I saw. But then tonight, listening to him in the saloon, I knew. He's a devil, that man. Miranda knelt beside Rosa's chair. You're safe now? We're going to make sure Edward faces justice for what he did. How? The sheriff is his cousin. The judge plays cards with him every Thursday. Who will believe me? The territorial marshal, Quinn said. He's already been contacted. With your testimony and the physical evidence, we can build a case. Rosa looked doubtful, but she nodded. I'll tell what I saw. For Mr. Zimmerman, he was always good to me. They spent the night planning. Rosa stayed with them, too frightened to return to the ranch. Quinn insisted on taking the couch, giving Miranda the bedroom, though she doubted any of them slept much. Every noise from the street made her tense, expecting Edward to come pounding on the door. Morning came with clear skies and the sound of church bells. Sunday in Albuquerque meant most businesses would be closed, but Miranda knew the telegraph office operated limited hours. They needed to find out if the marshal had received Jameson's message and when he might arrive. They were eating a spare breakfast of bread and coffee when another knock came. This time it was Theodore Jameson, looking grim. Thank God you're here, he said, accepting the coffee Miranda offered. Edward Fairmont tried to withdraw $50,000 from your father's account at the bank yesterday evening. He had papers he claimed gave him power of attorney. Did the bank give him the money? No, the bank manager knows better than to release that kind of sum without verification, especially on a Saturday evening. But Edward made quite a scene. Half the town heard him shouting about his rights as your intended husband. Quinn leaned against the counter. He's getting desperate. That's not all, Jameson continued. He's filed a complaint with the sheriff claiming Mr. Callahan here kidnapped you. "There's a warrant for your arrest, Quinn." "On what grounds?" Miranda demanded. "He claims Quinn forced you to leave the ranch at gunpoint and has been holding you against your will. The sheriff is organizing a search party." Quinn set down his coffee cup carefully. "A search party led by Edward, no doubt." "Actually, yes. He's volunteered to help track you down." The trap was elegant, Miranda had to admit. If Quinn ran, it made him look guilty. If he stayed, Edward would have him arrested and Miranda isolated. Either way, Edward regained control of the situation. "Then we don't run," Miranda said. "We go to the sheriff and tell the truth." "Miranda, the sheriff is biased," Jameson warned. "Maybe, but Rosa is a witness to murder. Even a biased sheriff can't ignore that." Rosa had been silent, but now she spoke up. "Miss Miranda, he'll have me arrested instead. He'll say I'm lying to protect you." "Not if we all go together and demand a fair hearing." Miranda looked at each of them. "Edward is counting on us being scared, on us running or hiding. But we have the truth on our side, and we have each other. That has to count for something." Quinn studied her with those assessing green eyes. "You're sure about this?" "No, but I'm sure that running won't solve anything. My father didn't raise a coward." They walked to the sheriff's office together, the four of them moving through Albuquerque's Sunday morning streets like soldiers heading into battle. People stared, and Miranda knew the gossip would be fierce by nightfall. The scandal of Marcus Zimmerman's daughter walking openly with a strange cowboy and a Mexican housekeeper, defying her respectable fiancé, would be discussed in every parlor in town. The sheriff's office was a squat adobe building near the courthouse. They found Sheriff Daniel Fairmont behind his desk, a man in his late 40s with Edward's same refined features, coarsened by years and whiskey. He looked up as they entered, and his expression hardened. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Callahan, you're under arrest." "On false charges," Miranda said, before Quinn could respond. "Sheriff, I need to report a murder." That got his attention. "What murder?" "My father's. He was killed by Edward Fairmont 4 days ago. Rosa Martinez witnessed it." The sheriff's gaze swung to Rosa, who stood straight despite her obvious fear. "Is that true?" "Yes, sir. I saw Mr. Edward Fairmont strike Mr. Zimmerman with a rock. He killed him and made it look like an accident." "That's a serious accusation." "It's the truth," Rosa said firmly. Sheriff Fairmont leaned back in his chair. "And why should I believe you? Edward tells me you've been caught stealing before." "That's a lie," Miranda interjected. "Rosa has worked for my family for 20 years without a single complaint." "Miss Zimmerman, you've been through a terrible shock. Your father's death has obviously affected your judgment. Running off with a stranger, making wild accusations against your fiancé. Perhaps you should return home and let the men handle this situation." The dismissive tone ignited Miranda's anger. "Sheriff, I am not hysterical, and I am not confused. I have documentation proving that Edward Fairmont is a fraud with debts across 3 territories. I have an eyewitness to my father's murder, and I have evidence that the injuries on my father's body don't match an accident. I'm requesting that you hold Edward Fairmont for questioning until the territorial marshal can arrive." "The marshal? You went over my head to the territorial marshal?" "My lawyer sent a telegram requesting an investigation. Sheriff, if you're as committed to justice as your oath requires, you should welcome federal oversight." The sheriff stood, his face reddening. "Miss Zimmerman, you're clearly not yourself. I'm going to send for your fiancé so he can take you home. I'm not going anywhere with Edward Fairmont. If you try to force me, I'll file charges against you." "For what?" "Conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory to murder, take your pick." Miranda met his gaze steadily. "Edward told you about his financial situation, didn't he? About his plan to marry me and gain control of the ranch? Maybe you even helped him arrange my father's accident." "That's defamation." "Then prove me wrong, allow an independent investigation. Let the marshal examine the evidence." The standoff might have continued, but the door burst open and Edward Fairmont himself strode in. He was dressed impeccably as always, every inch the gentleman in tailored clothes and polished boots. But his face was flushed, and Miranda could smell whiskey on him, even from across the room. "Miranda, thank God. I've been worried sick." He moved toward her, but Quinn stepped between them. "Stay back," Quinn said quietly. Edward's expression hardened. "Sheriff, arrest this man. He kidnapped my fiancé." "I did no such thing," Quinn replied. "Miss Zimmerman left her ranch of her own free will when I informed her that you're a fraud and possibly a murderer." Those are lies spread by a jealous drifter. Miranda, darling, surely you don't believe this nonsense. Come home with me. We'll sort this all out. Miranda stepped forward, standing beside Quinn. I'm not going anywhere with you, Edward. I know what you are. I know about your debts, your lies, the other women you've deceived, and I know you killed my father. Edward's mask slipped for just a moment, and Miranda saw cold calculation in his eyes. You're upset. The shock of your father's death has confused you. Once we're married, I'll make sure you get the care you need. We're not getting married. The engagement is over. Miranda, don't be foolish. Think about your reputation. If you call off the wedding now, after being seen all over town with this cowboy, you'll be ruined. No decent man will have you. You need me. I need you. Miranda felt a laugh bubble up, sharp with hysteria. You have nothing, Edward. No money, no property, no prospects. You need me, or rather, you need my inheritance. But you're not getting it. I'll burn the ranch to the ground before I let you steal what my father built. Edward's composure cracked completely. You ungrateful witch. Do you know what I've put up with these past months? Your provincial manners, your unladylike independence, your complete lack of culture. I earned that money, courting you, pretending you were something more than a rancher's brat playing at sophistication. The words should have hurt, but Miranda felt only relief. This was the real Edward Fairmont, stripped of charm and pretense. Sheriff, you heard him? He just admitted he courted me for my money. He admitted no such thing, the sheriff said, but he looked uncomfortable. Oh, for God's sake, Daniel, stop protecting me, Edward snapped. They already know everything. The Pinkerton report laid it all out. He turned back to Miranda. But it doesn't matter what you know. You signed papers 2 weeks ago giving me power of attorney. I made sure you were distracted, upset about wedding preparations. You probably don't even remember doing it, but your signature is on file. The ranch is already mine. Miranda felt ice in her veins. I never signed anything. Your signature says otherwise, and I have witnesses who will swear they saw you sign willingly. Forged, Jameson said from the doorway. I reviewed those documents this morning when you tried to withdraw funds. That's not Miss Zimmerman's signature. A handwriting expert will prove it. Edward's hand moved to his jacket. Quinn was faster. His gun cleared leather in a smooth motion. The barrel pointed steadily at Edward's chest. Don't! The room froze. The sheriff's hand hovered over his own weapon, and Rosa had pressed herself against the wall. Jameson stood very still, his face pale. Edward Fairmont, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and suspicion of murder, Quinn said. Sheriff, do your job, or I'll do it for you. You can't arrest anyone, the sheriff blustered. You have no authority. I have a citizen's right to detain a criminal, and I have enough bullets to make it stick. Edward laughed, the sound ugly. You'll hang for this, both of you. I have friends, connections. The judge is coming to my wedding. The territorial governor sent a gift. You're nobody, Callahan, just a drifter with delusions. And Miranda, you're a woman. Your word means nothing against mine. Maybe, said a new voice from the doorway, but mine does. They all turned to see a tall man in a marshal's badge standing in the entrance. He was in his 50s, with iron gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. I'm Marshal Thomas Grant. I received a telegram about irregularities in Marcus Zimmerman's death. From what I'm hearing, there's a lot more than irregularities going on here. The next hour was a blur of statements and evidence. Marshal Grant listened to Rosa's testimony, reviewed the Pinkerton report, and examined the forged documents. He questioned Edward, who alternated between charming denials and angry threats. He spoke with the undertaker about the injuries on Marcus Zimmerman's body. Finally, he emerged from the sheriff's back office and addressed the assembled group. Edward Fairmont, I'm placing you under federal custody for fraud and suspicion of murder. Sheriff Fairmont, your interference in this investigation is noted. I'll be filing a report with the territorial governor. Mr. Callahan, you're free to go. Miss Zimmerman, I'll need you and Mrs. Martinez to remain available for further questioning. Edward started shouting, threats and accusations pouring out in a venomous stream. It took the marshal and 2 deputies to wrestle him into a cell. The sheriff protested but ultimately stood aside, his authority superseded. When it was over, Miranda found herself standing in the street with Quinn, Jameson, and Rosa, blinking in the afternoon sunlight, like people emerging from a dark cave. Is it really over? She asked. The legal part is just beginning, Jameson said gently. But the immediate danger has passed. Edward will stand trial. With Rosa's testimony and the physical evidence, conviction is likely. What about the ranch? It's yours, free and clear. The forged documents are void. I'll file the necessary papers to settle your father's estate. Jameson paused. Miss Zimmerman, I know you're grieving, but you need to think about the future. The ranch needs management. You'll need a new foreman, and with Jack Morrison gone for another week, someone needs to be in charge. Miranda looked at Quinn, who had been silent since they left the sheriff's office. Mr. Callahan, I know this is sudden, but I'd like to offer you a job, at least temporarily. I need someone I can trust, and you've proven yourself to be that man. Quinn's eyebrows rose. Miss Zimmerman, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that's wise. After everything that's happened, people will talk. People are already talking. At least this way I'll have help running the ranch, unless you have somewhere else you need to be. He studied her for a long moment. No, I don't. Then it's settled. We'll head back to the ranch tomorrow, after I've made arrangements for my father's funeral. They buried Marcus Zimmerman 3 days later, in the small cemetery on a hill overlooking his ranch. The territorial marshal had completed his examination, confirming that the injuries were consistent with assault rather than accident. Rosa's testimony had been documented and signed. Edward Fairmont remained in custody, his trial scheduled for the following month. Miranda stood beside the grave in black silk, watching as her father was lowered into the New Mexico earth he'd loved. A surprising number of people had come to pay respects. Ranchers her father had dealt with fairly. Mexican families he'd hired and treated with respect. Townspeople who'd known him for decades. Even some of her father's old ranch hands, men who'd moved on to other jobs but remembered Marcus Zimmerman as a good boss. Quinn stood a little apart, respectful of her grief, but present if she needed him. He'd spent the past days at the ranch, assessing its operations and beginning to organize the work that needed doing. Miranda had watched him interact with the remaining hands and seen their initial suspicion slowly turn to respect. Quinn knew his work, and he treated people fairly. It was all any good cowboy needed to earn trust. After the service, people came to offer condolences. Miranda accepted them with as much grace as she could muster, but she felt hollowed out, exhausted by grief and the aftermath of Edward's betrayal. When the last mourner finally left, she stood alone by the grave, trying to find words for a goodbye she wasn't ready to say. He'd be proud of you. She turned to find Quinn approaching, his hat in his hands. I don't feel like there's much to be proud of. I brought a murderer into our lives. You also stopped him before he could finish what he started. That takes courage. Or stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing. Quinn came to stand beside her, looking down at the fresh-turned earth. My father's buried in Texas. I haven't been back to visit his grave in 15 years. Keep meaning to, but there's always work, always some reason to stay away. Don't do that. Don't let grief become something you avoid. Is that what you did? Yeah, after my mother died, I couldn't stand to stay in one place. Kept moving, kept working, figured if I stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel anything. Took me a long time to realize I was just running. Miranda looked at him, this man who'd appeared in her life at its darkest moment. What made you stop running? Haven't yet, not really. But standing here, helping you fight for what's yours, it made me remember why my parents worked so hard. They were building something, creating a legacy. That matters. It's worth fighting for. Will you stay? The words came out before Miranda could think about them. After Jack returns, after everything is settled, will you stay at the ranch? Quinn met her eyes. Do you want me to? I don't know what I want right now, but I know I feel safer when you're around. I know I trust you, which is more than I can say for most people at the moment. That's not enough for the long term. Maybe not, but it's enough for now. They walked back to the ranch house together as the sun set, painting the desert sky in shades of coral and purple. Rosa had prepared food for the gathered mourners, and the house was full of the warm smells of chile and fresh bread. People ate and talked, sharing memories of Marcus Zimmerman, and Miranda felt some of the tightness in her chest ease. Her father had been loved, respected. That mattered. Jack Morrison returned from his cattle drive 3 days later, shocked and furious to learn what had happened in his absence. I never should have left, he kept saying. If I'd been here, Mr. Zimmerman would still be alive. You couldn't have known, Miranda assured him. Edward manipulated all of us. He was planning this for months. Jack spent an hour talking with Quinn, assessing what had been done in his absence and what still needed doing. When he emerged from the meeting, he sought out Miranda. "Miss Zimmerman, that Callahan fellow knows his business. I'd recommend keeping him on permanent if he's willing. We could use another good hand, especially with everything you've been through." Miranda had been thinking the same thing. The ranch was a massive operation, requiring constant attention and hard work. She'd grown up helping her father manage it, but she knew she couldn't do it alone. Jack was invaluable as a foreman, but he was getting older, and the work was hard. Having Quinn as a second manager, someone younger and equally capable, made practical sense. But it was more than practical considerations that made her seek Quinn out that evening. She found him in the barn, checking on one of the horses that had come up lame. "Jack says you're good at this," she said from the doorway. Quinn looked up from examining the horse's hoof. "Jack's being generous. I'm competent. That's more than most. Quinn, I want to make the job offer official. I'd like you to stay on as assistant foreman. The pay is fair, and there's a house you can use. It's small, but it's yours." He set down the horse's leg and straightened. "You sure about this? People in town are already gossiping about us." "Let them gossip. I'm done living my life according to other people's expectations. That's what got me engaged to Edward in the first place." She moved into the barn, the smell of hay and horse familiar and comforting. "I need people I can trust, Quinn. You've proven you're that person. If you want the job, it's yours. What if I want more than a job?" The question hung in the air between them. Miranda's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" Quinn crossed the space between them slowly, giving her plenty of time to step back if she wanted. She didn't move. When he stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes, he said, "I mean that in the past week, I've watched you face down a murderer, defy corrupt authority, and fight for what's yours with more courage than most men I know. I've seen you grieve your father with dignity and honor his memory by refusing to let his killer win. And somewhere in all that, I started to care about you. Not the heiress, not the ranch owner, but you, Miranda Zimmerman, the woman who reads poetry and rides like the wind and doesn't back down from a fight." Miranda's breath caught. "Quinn, I'm not ready. Everything with Edward is still too fresh. I don't trust my own judgment anymore. I know. That's why I'm not asking you for anything right now. I'm just telling you the truth so you know where I stand. I'll take the job, and I'll be here when you're ready. If you're ever ready. And if you're never ready, I'll still be your friend and your employee, and count myself lucky for that." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of stubble under her palm. "You're a good man, Quinn Callahan." "I'm trying to be. For you, I want to be." They stood there in the golden lamplight of the barn, a moment of stillness in the chaos that had consumed the past week. Miranda felt something shift inside her, the first small crack in the walls she'd built around her heart since Edward's betrayal. It would take time to heal, to learn to trust again. But standing here with Quinn, she could imagine a future where that might be possible. The trial of Edward Fairmont took place 6 weeks later, in October 1885. The territorial prosecutor presented a damning case built on Rose's eyewitness testimony, the physical evidence of murder, documentation of Edward's fraudulent activities, and the forged signatures on financial documents. Edward's defense attorney attempted to discredit Rosa as a witness, but her testimony remained consistent under cross-examination, and the jury found her credible. Miranda attended every day of the trial, sitting in the front row with Quinn beside her. She watched Edward's mask of civility crack further with each day, revealing the entitled, vicious man beneath. He'd constructed an elaborate fantasy where he deserved wealth and status simply for being born, where people like Miranda and her father were obstacles to be manipulated or removed. When the guilty verdict came down, Edward's face contorted with rage. As the marshal led him away, he turned to shout at Miranda, "You think you've won? You'll die alone, Miranda Zimmerman. No man will want you now. You're damaged goods, a woman who couldn't keep her fiancé. You'll grow old and bitter in that ranch house, and when you die, there'll be no one to mourn you." Quinn started to rise, but Miranda put a hand on his arm. "He's not worth it. He's already lost everything. His words can't hurt me anymore." But that night, alone in her room, Edward's words echoed. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw the changes the past 2 months had wrought. She'd lost weight, and there were new lines around her eyes. She looked older, harder. Would anyone want her now, knowing her story? The jilted heiress who'd been fooled by a fortune hunter, A knock at her door interrupted her spiral. "Miranda, it's Rosa. May I come in?" "Of course." Rosa entered carrying a tray with tea and sweet bread. "You didn't eat much dinner. I thought you might be hungry." "I'm fine, Rosa, thank you." The older woman set down the tray and fixed Miranda with a knowing look. "You're thinking about what he said in the courtroom. It doesn't matter. It does if it's keeping you awake. Miranda, listen to me. Edward Fairmont is a liar. Everything that comes from his mouth is poison. You are not damaged. You are not unlovable. You are a strong, intelligent woman who survived something that would have destroyed weaker people. I feel destroyed sometimes. That's grief and shock. It will pass." Rosa sat beside her on the bed. "I've watched you grow from a little girl into a woman your father was so proud of. I've also watched Quinn Callahan watch you, and Miha. That man doesn't see damaged goods. He sees someone worth waiting for. Rosa, I can't think about that right now. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying don't let Edward's cruelty make you close yourself off. When you're ready, there's a good man who cares for you. That's something worth remembering." Edward was sentenced to 15 years for fraud and murder. The sentence felt both too long and not long enough. 15 years in the territorial prison would be harsh, might even be a death sentence given the conditions. But it wouldn't bring her father back, wouldn't undo the trauma of his death. After the trial, Miranda threw herself into ranch work. The fall cattle drive was approaching, and preparations consumed her days. She rode out with the hands, helped with branding, worked until she was too exhausted to dream. Quinn worked alongside her, never pushing, never asking for more than she offered, but always present. Jack Morrison watched them, with the knowing eyes of a man who'd seen many seasons come and go. "You know," he said to Miranda one evening as they reviewed the books, "your father wanted you to be happy. That's all he ever wanted." "I know. Do you? Because sometimes I think you're punishing yourself for what happened to him. Working yourself into the ground won't bring him back, girl." "I'm fine, Jack. You're surviving. That's not the same as fine." He closed the ledger gently. "Your father would want you to live, Miranda. Fully live, not just exist." She thought about that conversation as she rode the northern pasture the next day, checking fence lines. It was the same area where her father had died, and she'd been avoiding it since the trial. But today she forced herself to face it, to see the place where Edward had ended her father's life. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, golden grass waving in the breeze. Hawks circled overhead, and in the distance, the Sandia Mountains rose purple against the blue sky. It was beautiful, this land her father had loved. She could understand why he'd spent his life building something here. "Thought I might find you here." She turned to see Quinn riding up on his bay gelding. "Did you follow me?" "Jack was worried, asked me to make sure you were okay." "I'm fine. You keep saying that." Quinn dismounted and came to stand beside her horse. "Miranda, you don't have to be fine all the time. You don't have to be strong every moment. Sometimes it's okay to admit you're hurting. If I admit I'm hurting, I might fall apart. And I can't afford to fall apart. The ranch needs me. The people who work here depend on me. I have to be strong." "Your father was strong, but he also knew when to let people help him. That's not weakness. That's wisdom." Miranda felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. "I miss him so much. Every day I think of something I want to tell him, and then I remember he's gone. And I'm angry. I'm so angry at Edward for taking him away, and I'm angry at myself for bringing Edward into our lives. And I'm angry at my father for dying and leaving me alone." "You're not alone." The simple statement broke something inside her. Miranda slid from her horse and found herself in Quinn's arms, finally letting herself cry the way she needed to. He held her while she sobbed, one hand cradling her head, the other wrapped firmly around her waist. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix anything. He just held her and let her grieve. When the storm finally passed, Miranda pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to fall apart on you." "Don't apologize. You're entitled to fall apart. You've been through hell." Quinn produced a handkerchief from his pocket. "Better?" "A little." She wiped her eyes. "Thank you. For being here. For everything." "Miranda, I meant what I said in the barn. I'm here for as long as you want me." She looked up at him. This man who'd appeared in her darkest hour and proven himself in every way that mattered. He wasn't polished like Edward. He didn't have pretty words or refined manners, But he was real, solid, trustworthy. And somewhere in the past 3 months, she'd started to care for him in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with who he was. "What if I want you here for a very long time?" she asked quietly. Quinn's expression softened. "Then I'd say, I'm the luckiest man in New Mexico. I'm not ready for anything serious yet. I need time to heal, to learn who I am without my father's guidance. But I'd like it if you'd be patient with me. I've got nothing but time and patience where you're concerned." She smiled for what felt like the first time in months. "Then let's go home. We've got a ranch to run." They rode back together, not touching, but close enough that their knees occasionally brushed. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might become romance given time and care. And for now, that was enough. The winter of 1885 was mild by New Mexico standards, with only occasional snow dusting the high desert. Miranda settled into the rhythms of ranch life, finding comfort in the familiar work. She rose before dawn to help with feeding, spent her days riding fence lines and managing the business side of operations, and fell into bed exhausted each night. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. Quinn was a constant presence, but he never pushed. He worked alongside her, offered advice when asked, and respected her need for space. But there were moments that hinted at something deeper, his hand steadying her when she slipped on ice, the way he always saved her the best portions at dinner, how he listened when she talked about her father without trying to rush her grief. Christmas came, and Rosa insisted on celebrating despite the sadness that still colored everything. She cooked a feast, and the ranch hands gathered in the main house for food and companionship. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was music and even some dancing. Quinn asked Miranda for one dance, holding her carefully, respectfully, and when the song ended, he simply said, "Thank you," and walked away, leaving her wanting more. The new year of 1886 arrived with cold, clear skies. Miranda made a point of visiting her father's grave on New Year's Day, bringing flowers that would wilt quickly in the winter air, but felt necessary anyway. "I'm doing okay, Papa," she said to the headstone. "The ranch is running well, Jack and Quinn make a good team, and I'm learning every day. I think you'd be proud of how I handled everything with Edward. I didn't let him win." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "There's something else? Quinn Callahan. I think you would have liked him. He's honest and hardworking, and he makes me feel safe. I'm not ready yet, but I think I might be falling in love with him. Is that okay? Am I being foolish again?" The wind whispered through the dry grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow. Miranda imagined she could hear her father's voice in it, telling her to trust her heart, to be brave, to live fully. She stood there for a long time, saying a different kind of goodbye. Not goodbye to her father, but goodbye to the grief that had consumed her, the fear that had paralyzed her. It was time to start living again. She found Quinn in the barn that evening, mending tack by lamplight. "Can we talk?" He set aside the leather immediately. "Of course. What's on your mind?" Miranda sat on a hay bale, suddenly nervous. "I've been thinking about what you said, about caring for me." "Miranda, you don't have to." "Let me finish, please." She took a breath. "These past 4 months, you've been everything I needed. A friend, a protector, a partner in running this ranch. You've never asked for anything in return, never pressured me, never made me feel like I owed you something. That's rare, that's special." Quinn watched her intently. But nothing. I'm trying to say that I think I'm ready to try. Not marriage, not yet. But maybe courting? Proper courting. Where we spend time together and see if this feeling between us is real. A slow smile spread across Quinn's face, transforming his usually serious expression. "Are you asking me to court you, Miss Zimmerman? I suppose I am, unless that's too forward. I've been told I'm too independent for polite society." "Polite society can go to hell. I think your independence is one of your best qualities." Quinn stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Miranda Zimmerman, I would be honored to court you, properly, respectfully, and for as long as you'll have me." Their courtship was nothing like Miranda's doomed engagement to Edward. There were no fancy balls or elaborate gifts. Instead, Quinn courted her with quiet gestures, bringing her coffee on cold mornings, teaching her a new technique for breaking horses, sitting with her on the porch in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood in Texas, about losing his mother and striking out on his own at 15. He spoke of the ranches he'd worked, the good bosses and the bad, the years of drifting and searching for a place to belong. "I never felt settled anywhere until I came here," he admitted one evening. "This ranch, this place, you, it feels like home." Miranda shared her own stories, growing up wild under her father's indulgent eye, learning to ride before she could read, the loneliness of being a woman in a world that expected her to be decorative rather than useful. "My father never treated me like I was less capable because I was female. He expected me to learn the business, to be able to run the ranch myself if necessary. That was a gift." "It was, and it's one of the things I admire most about you. You don't pretend to be helpless or delicate. You're real." Their first kiss happened 6 weeks into their courtship, on a February evening when the desert sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. They'd ridden out to check a water tank and were walking back to their horses when Miranda stumbled on a rock. Quinn caught her, steadying her, and somehow they ended up facing each other, close enough that she could see his pupils dilate. "Miranda," he said, his voice rough, "can I kiss you?" She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, questioning, nothing like Edward's practiced seductions. Quinn kissed her like she was precious, like he wanted to savor every moment, and when they finally pulled apart, Miranda felt like she was glowing from the inside. "I've been wanting to do that for months," Quinn admitted. "Then why didn't you?" "Because I wanted you to be sure. I wanted you to come to me freely, not because you felt obligated or because I pushed." "I'm sure," Miranda said. "I'm very sure." They took their time, building something real and lasting. Spring came to New Mexico with wildflowers and new calves. The ranch thrived under their combined management, and Miranda felt herself blossoming alongside it. The townspeople gradually accepted Quinn's presence at the ranch, recognizing that he was there through honest work and mutual respect rather than manipulation. In April, Quinn took Miranda to Albuquerque for dinner at the finest restaurant in town. Over steak and wine, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Miranda, I know we've only been courting a few months, but I've known you for nearly a year now. I've seen you at your worst and your best. I've watched you face down murderers and run a ranch and honor your father's memory. And I've fallen completely in love with you." Her heart stuttered. "Quinn, let me finish. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight. I know you need more time, and I respect that. But I want you to know that when you're ready, whenever that is, I'll be here. I want to build a life with you, Miranda. I want to wake up next to you every morning and work alongside you every day. I want to have children with you and grow old with you and leave something lasting behind when we're gone. I love you. That's all I wanted to say." Miranda felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears this time. "I love you too. I think I've loved you since you stood in my parlor and told me the truth about Edward, even though you had no reason to involve yourself in my problems. You saved my life, Quinn Callahan, in more ways than one. Does that mean you'll marry me, eventually?" "Eventually. Let's give it a year from today. April 1887. If we still feel this way in a year, if we've built something solid, then yes, I'll marry you." Quinn raised her hand to his lips. "I'll wait as long as you need. You're worth waiting for." The year that followed was the happiest of Miranda's life. She and Quinn worked together, building the ranch into one of the most successful operations in New Mexico. They added breeding stock, improved their water systems, and treated their workers fairly, earning loyalty and respect throughout the territory. In August, word came that Edward Fairmont had died in prison, killed in a fight with another inmate. Miranda felt nothing but a distant relief. That chapter of her life was finally, truly closed. As winter approached again, Quinn moved from the foreman's house into the main ranch house. It was practical, they told themselves, and anyone who asked. They were working such long hours that having to walk between buildings was inefficient. But really, neither of them wanted to sleep apart anymore. They were building a life together, and that meant sharing a home. On a cold December night, curled up together in front of the fire, Quinn said, "I've been thinking." "Dangerous occupation," Miranda teased. "I'm serious. April is still 4 months away, and I don't want to wait that long to marry you. What do you say we move the date up? Get married on New Year's Day? Start 1887 as husband and wife?" Miranda considered. The year she'd asked for was nearly complete, and she'd never been more certain of anything. "Yes, let's do it. But a small ceremony, just family and close friends. I don't want anything like what I'd planned with Edward. Small and simple sounds perfect to me. They married on January 1st, 1887, in the ranch house parlor where Quinn had first told Miranda the truth about Edward. Rosa cried happy tears. Jack Morrison served as Quinn's best man. And Theodore Jameson gave Miranda away in place of her father. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when Quinn kissed his bride, everyone cheered. That night, alone in their bedroom, Quinn held Miranda close and said, "Thank you for choosing me, for trusting me, for giving us this chance. Thank you for waiting, for being patient, for loving me even when I was broken. You were never broken. You were healing. There's a difference." They made love for the first time, as husband and wife, taking their time, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Miranda felt a profound sense of peace. This was what love should be: partnership, respect, genuine affection. Not the performance Edward had offered, but something real and lasting. The years that followed were full of challenges and triumphs. Running a ranch in New Mexico territory demanded constant work, but Miranda and Quinn thrived on it. They weathered droughts and market fluctuations, dealt with rustlers and predators, and slowly built their operation into one of the most respected in the territory. In October 1887, Miranda discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. They'd talked about children, wanted them, but the reality was suddenly very present. "What if something goes wrong?" Miranda asked one night, her hand on her still flat stomach. "Then we'll face it together. But nothing's going to go wrong. You're strong and healthy, and we'll get the best doctor in the territory when the time comes." "My mother died giving birth to my younger brother. He died too. I was 10. It's my earliest clear memory of true loss." Quinn pulled her close. "That won't happen to you. I won't let it." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I'll be with you every step of the way. We're in this together, remember?" Their son was born in June 1888, a healthy baby boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Marcus Quinn Callahan, honoring Miranda's father and binding Quinn's name to their family legacy. The birth was long and difficult, but Miranda came through it strong, and holding her son for the first time, she felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. Quinn proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings and changing diapers without complaint. "I don't want to be one of those fathers who acts like raising children is solely women's work," he said. "This is our son, our responsibility, our joy." They had 2 more children in the years that followed, a daughter named Caroline in 1890 and another son named Daniel in 1893. The ranch house filled with the sounds of children playing, and Miranda discovered that being a mother was both harder and more rewarding than she'd ever imagined. On a spring evening in 1895, Miranda and Quinn sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Marcus was nearly 7, already showing an interest in ranch work. Caroline was 5, fearless on horseback. Daniel was 2, toddling around with the single-minded determination of a child who'd recently discovered walking. "Do you ever regret it?" Miranda asked. "Stopping here? You could have kept drifting, stayed free." Quinn took her hand, linking their fingers together. "I was never free when I was drifting. I was lost. You gave me a home, Miranda, a purpose, a family. You gave me everything that matters. You saved my life. If you hadn't come to warn me about Edward, I would have married him. He would have stolen everything my father built, and I probably wouldn't have survived it. He said he was after your fortune, not your hand. Turns out I wanted both, and I got them honestly." Miranda laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. "We built something good here, something lasting." "We did, and we're not done yet. There's still more life to live, more memories to make." As the sun set over the New Mexico desert, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and purple, Miranda reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd lost her father, been betrayed by a man she'd trusted, and faced down murder and corruption. But she'd also found real love, built a family, and learned that strength wasn't about never falling apart. It was about having people you trusted to help you put yourself back together. Quinn had been right that day in her parlor when he'd told her Edward Fairmont was after her fortune, not her hand. But Quinn himself had wanted both, and he'd earned them through honesty, patience, and genuine love. He'd proven that a man's worth wasn't measured in polish and refinement, but in character and commitment. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Their children grew and thrived. Marcus eventually took over much of the ranch management, while Caroline married a neighboring rancher's son, and Daniel studied law in Santa Fe. The ranch prospered, becoming known throughout New Mexico for the quality of its cattle and the integrity of its owners. On their 25th wedding anniversary in January 1912, Quinn and Miranda renewed their vows in the same parlor where they'd first married. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, 3 generations united in celebration. Miranda was 48 now, her honey-colored hair touched with silver. Quinn was 52, his face weathered by decades of working under the New Mexico sun. But when they looked at each other, they saw the same people who'd fallen in love during the darkest time of Miranda's life. 25 years, Miranda said that night as they lay in bed. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. Good forever or bad forever. The best forever. Quinn, you've given me more happiness than I ever imagined possible. When we met, I was engaged to a man who saw me as nothing more than a means to wealth. You saw me as a person worth knowing, worth waiting for, worth loving. That changed everything. You changed me too. Before I met you, I was just existing, moving from place to place without purpose. You gave me roots, Miranda. You gave me a reason to stay, to build, to become more than just a drifting cowboy. They held each other in the darkness, 2 people who'd been through fire together and emerged stronger for it. Outside, the New Mexico wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and coming rain. This land that had witnessed their struggles and triumphs would continue long after they were gone, but the legacy they had built together would endure. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the fortune Miranda had inherited, though it had provided security and opportunity. What mattered was the family they had raised, the life they'd shared, and the love that had sustained them through every challenge. Quinn had been right when he'd warned Miranda that Edward was after her fortune, not her hand. But in doing so, Quinn had revealed himself to be a man worthy of both. And Miranda, who'd been strong enough to listen, brave enough to fight, and wise enough to recognize real love when it finally appeared, had chosen well. Their story became part of the ranch's history, told and retold through the generations that followed. The tale of how a cowboy had saved an heiress from a fortune hunter, and how that act of integrity had led to a love that transformed both their lives. It was a story of courage and redemption, of learning to trust again after betrayal, of building something lasting in the wild, beautiful, unforgiving landscape of New Mexico territory. And when Miranda and Quinn were finally laid to rest, side by side in the cemetery on the hill, their great-grandchildren looked at the matching headstones and knew they had witnessed something rare, a love story that had endured not because it was easy, but because 2 people had chosen each other every single day through joy and sorrow, triumph and loss for more than half a century. The ranch continued under their descendants' care, still bearing the Zimmerman name that Marcus had built and Miranda had preserved. And on quiet evenings, when the wind swept down from the Sandia Mountains and the desert bloomed with wildflowers, people said you could almost feel their presence, the cowboy and the heiress who'd found each other at the darkest moment and built a love that would echo through time. Their story served as a reminder that fortune could be lost or stolen, but the right person would want your hand first, your heart always, and your fortune only, as something to build together. Quinn Callahan had understood that from the beginning, and Miranda Zimmerman had been brave enough to recognize it and wise enough to choose it. Together, they'd created something that no Edward Fairmont could ever steal, a true partnership, an honest love, and a legacy that would endure for generations. The Wild West was harsh and unforgiving, a place where survival demanded strength and success required courage. But it was also a place where 2 people could meet in the midst of tragedy and build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal, where a wandering cowboy could find a home and a grieving woman could discover joy again, where honesty was rewarded and integrity recognized, where love, real love, could triumph over deception and greed. That was the true story of Miranda Zimmerman and Quinn Callahan. Not just a tale of how he'd saved her from a fortune hunter, but how they'd saved each other from loneliness, from aimlessness, from half-lived lives. They'd found in each other exactly what they needed, and in doing so, they'd proved that the Wild West, for all its harshness, could also be a place where dreams came true and love stories began.